Yesterday was the first head-to-head Tory leader TV debate featuring Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. How was it for you? I'm Ranjan Balakumaran of London Conversation, joined today by my friend William Kedjanyi, political betting analyst for Star Sports Betting. Hello, William.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Enjoying the break. And you, can you tell me, what are your thoughts, particularly about three subjects that we're going to look at? One is, I saw an article in the Financial Times by Stephen Bush, formerly the New Statesman, currently of the FT, talking about political betting. I saw an article a couple of days ago saying that if Rishi Sunak wins, he's going to appoint Steve Barclay as his Chancellor, and Liz Truss would appoint Kwasi Kwarteng. And there was a YouGov poll that I wanted to ask you about in relation to last night. Can you tell me about the political betting article by Stephen Bush?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a really good case that he puts across, and I think it's a really good point he makes. For anybody who is bereft of the FT in their life, and if that is the case, listen to this, what are you doing? But it's the long story short of it, is basically that bookies odds, bookies predictions, whether they be exchange odds or whether they be fixed odds. I deal with fixed odds, but I use both. Can be a useful reference when it comes to commentary because it allows you another angle, it allows you another way in. So journalists do use them. I was quoted in the Express today. The BBC used Exchequer guides. I've been on TV with it. They can be useful as commentary. But in terms of how predictive they are not as good as or better than polls. All right, this has been a thing people talk about for ages. Are the bookies as good as pollsters or not? The answer is no. The reason for that being twofold. First of all, polling is a brilliant science, and it is an underrated one still. Polls are methodically weighted to reflect the populations involved in those decisions and those attitudes as best they can. That's why they're so expensive at the top level. You know, if you wanted the poll commissioned, you're paying thousands for the top guys, you know, your YouGovs and your Patrick Englishes and your Chris Curtises and, you know, a British polling council member, it will set you back grand. And that's how it should be. It's extremely deep research. Political betting markets or betting markets itself are not accurate predictors or not meant to be predictive totally of anything. They reflect the state of play in the market at that time. So, for example, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, Liz Truss currently is seen as 76% likely to win this Tory leadership race. That just doesn't actually mean her chances are 76%. What it means is basically that the odds would imply that, and I think people get that mixed up. And that's what that's the point Bush is making, and I think it's a very good one. I think also it gives us lovely context because the exchanges and such are useful for trading, and fixed odds and such are useful for having bets that stay at a certain value where you can get your value locked in earlier. And I think that's the way I see it in terms of how it works.
Okay, so I've never been on an exchange. Many years ago, I've been to bookies and, you know, put like money on football. He said that he would, he didn't bet, but he would have on an exchange gone for Kemi Badenoch because he knew that the odds would change. Is there a similar way of adopting that type of a strategy for fixed odds, like what you guys deal with? Does it just mean going in early or something like that?
Yeah, and with fixed odds, it's just, do you want to have the value, the perceived value, and do you just want to bet a price that you think is better than the implied odds should be? People do that all the time with fixed odds. It's still a big part of the game, as we call it, between sort of punter and bookie. So with fixed odds, the one thing I'd say is that you don't get a chance to jump out automatically. But if you're, I mean, to be fair, you can still trade. You can have different bets to offset your earlier ones. There's nothing preventing you from doing that with a fixed odds bookmaker. It's just that with the exchanges and all that, you usually get the options presented to you. Betfair will do it automatically. Smarkets will offer you some sort of option. You know, so that's the general difference. But you could have an odd fixed odds bet with one bookmaker, have another with a different bookmaker, have the difference for yourself, that sort of thing.
Okay, put more money on in different directions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on what the odds are, wherever.
Okay, thanks very much. Barclay and Kwasi, what are your thoughts on that before we start talking about yesterday's TV debate? Because I know that you're of Ghanaian origin as well, so it's interesting. We're talking about stats and firsts and things like that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what Steve Barclay would be the first, but I'm sure he'd be the first something. And of course, Kwasi, who I've met and I found personally quite charming, unlike I do on the TV. Tell me, what would be the story? There's quite a narrative. What would have been how on earth could we have a scenario where we've got Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries backing someone who was a Remainer, which could ultimately lead to Kwasi looking quite likely to become the next Chancellor? I mean, how do you think he could be the next Chancellor?
I think he's definitely in that race. From what I've seen, the Truss list of potential cabinet members is not all that wide in certain positions. And when you take into account, I don't know who Simon Clarke is backing. I should remember that off the top of my head.
He's in with Truss. He's in with the Truss team.
So it's Clarke, Barclay, and Kwarteng, the most notable names. And you'd suggest that all of them would be in line for reasonably high positions. I mean, I think it would be a big thing to have a first Black Chancellor. I think those sort of things are still notable. Indeed, actually, YouGov have polled this, and I think 4 out of 10 ethnic minority Britons would consider it notable if Sunak became Prime Minister. I'm pretty sure there'd be the roughly same ratings for a cabinet minister of an ethnic minority. Well, we have those already. We've had those, but for a great office of state to be held by one would be big. I think these are big symbolic steps. I think also it is the great political legacy of David Cameron domestically. That he moved the dial and he got there before Labour did, I think, in the sense of pipelines of talent going to the upper echelons. Although, again, I think it's very much worth saying the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years. Natural they'd get the first crack at that sort of thing. In terms of their relative merits, I'm not going to go too much into my political views or whatever, but the more experience, I think, in the previous position, the better. I'd favour Kwarteng over Barclay because he's been a business minister, and I think it's best to have easily transferable skills when it comes to it. I know that Barclay, I think, has been Chief Secretary of the Treasury before, but I think Kwarteng's had more cabinet experience, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and Kwarteng's been a safe pair of hands on the TV. When I say safe pair of hands, I'm talking about from my memory of watching Channel 4 occasionally over the years. Bless you. There's certain people that you deploy when when there is trouble, and their sentence structures and their ability to put the other side. Barclay and Kwarteng, I've seen them both deployed for similar reasons, and Kwarteng, I think, generally it sounded like he was listening to what other people were saying, even though saying something completely very different. I think he's better on television. That's my view, but
yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think this is a cabinet which is very much it'll be reformed, but it was very much a campaigning cabinet, and it was very much, I think, seen in terms of pleasing their voter base. It's interesting actually that Kwarteng generally didn't get the pelt as other cabinet members did. For relatively poor job performances, etc., etc. Dorries is one I'm thinking of, but there have been others who have managed to get it, and that might be a bit notable as far as Tory circles go.
What about the last night? We spoke earlier on, and you told me that there were 22 interruptions. I know that you're quite interested in football and other sports. Is that true? Did you hear that there were 22 interruptions, and was that counted? And
via James Heal, there were 22 interruptions in the first 10 minutes from Rishi Sunak. I presume it would have been counted. It sounded true to me. Sunak was aggressive. He went out to try and land a blow on Truss. I think he has to do that. He has to chase this. My personal view was that when I saw it, I thought, actually, he's doing quite well here. Truss is being exposed But she held her composure better than she did in previous debates. And in terms of Sunak's ratings with Conservative Party members who watched the debate, he lost with Opinion in the Snap poll, and he lost with YouGov as well. And that's a blow. That's a serious blow. The pair of them are debating right now with Talk TV, but you get the feeling that was the first big one. And he's got to make a big sort of Reagan-esque intervention in that sense, and it's tough really to see where he claws that.
Do you think that she may have, along with her team and advisors, lured him into that number of interruptions by perhaps speaking relatively slowly and taking ages to get to the point, and somehow by being able to hold the ball up, as it were, almost dither enough for him to just say, I've had enough, I'm coming in? Because he did just come in a lot. I mean, even I was thinking, and I have no dog in the race, mate, hold it for a second.
I think that it was more Sunak's over-eagerness to make that blow. And I think the fact that he had to, I think it was more the sort of mechanics of the game. Truss being so far ahead, she doesn't have to do anything during these debates. She just has to not collapse on stage in a sort of verbal sense, which she did, I think, just fine last night. I don't think she baited them into it. I don't think they were thinking that deeply. I think they were thinking about their key messages and their key lines, and Sunak had to do all the running. And that's always a harder thing to do, particularly when you're behind. She
gave Boris 7 out of 10 for his performance, and Sunak gave 10. That's interesting. His reason was because he said that Boris had sorted out he found a Brexit solution and then won an election. One of the things I found quite funny about that was, of course, that the Brexit solution was an alternative to the withdrawal agreement, which is now being reneged upon, which means that then the electoral victory was actually based on an understanding that has now been completely reversed. Does that matter in any way to the general public, to the Tory voters, to the Tory members?
Matters to the general public. Not sure it matters to the Tory voters or members, depending on what happens with the protocol and depending on what they see as the results of it. This is the problem for the Conservative Party I think, the short and the longer term. Longer term, because the Brexit outcomes have not impressed their voters and they have not impressed the general public as well. And problematic in the short term, because you've got to appeal to the Tory members who correlate well, but not 110% with the Tory voters, who are then at odds with over 50% of the general electorate. And if you're wanting, I don't think they're going to do this, but if you're wanting to have a general election pretty early, right? If you wanted to take advantage of that new leader bounce and get Keir Starmer sort of on the skids, you're giving him a lot of attack lines with this. This is all perfect for Labour. It's even better for the Lib Dems, and it doesn't help you in Scotland or Wales either. And come to think of it, not Northern Ireland, especially. So you're in a rock and a hard place if you're going and you're giving marks of 7 and 10 for a Brexit that the UK is attempting to rip up and replace with nothing.
Okay, brilliant. And then before looking at the poll numbers, just because you have Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries behind you, just that alone makes it look like your continuity Boris, on the basis that Boris is with them and wants that. But then on the other hand, Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor during Boris, and he doesn't appear to be distancing himself from continuity Boris in many ways by giving out 10 out of 10, etc. So are they both continuity, Boris? What do you think? How do you think this looks to the outside world?
I think there's an argument for saying both of them are continuity, Boris. In policy, we're not going to see many great changes. Sunak will keep the fiscal policies of the Johnson premiership. I don't know really how else he diverge from it. Both are going to continue with Rwanda. Both, I think, are going to have their own views on the Northern Ireland protocol, I think Sunak is less likely to try and burn it with fire on the first day of Downing Street than Truss is. But I haven't heard any major divergence. And I think, there's not for saying both are continuity, Boris. I think the main thing they're going to sell to the electorate is character differences. And that's just standards because Boris Johnson is Boris Johnson. And Liz Truss may well try and, she is adopting quite a few of the Johnsonian characteristics, but she knows that plays well with the Tory voters. So I think, there's an argument to be that both of them are continuity, Boris. I think it's easier, I should say, for Labour and the Lib Dems to say that, particularly given that Sunak might not change a huge amount, and Truss has that sort of boosterism. So I would agree with that to an extent. And of course, both from his cabinet, and great officers of state in his cabinet, and both served under him for years.
Sure. The opinion poll. Did you have a chance to have a look at it? And what did you make of it? I remember, getting in contact with you because I thought some of it was quite interesting, but I don't usually look at this type of thing.
I did. Thought it was interesting. I think the depressing thing for Sunak is that, these are the big occasions he wants to be making up his ground in. And he would have had, I think, what he said would be a reasonable night. And he's losing by 11 points to Truss in this debate. And this is the stuff that suits him best.
This is 500 people interviewed, right? 500. 500
is the sample, but it's weighted, and YouGov do a very good job. I would be able to take it with at least a reasonable amount of trust. I certainly don't think there are any ricks here.
And they said there's about 120 Remainers and about 350 Leavers from these Tory voters. Yeah,
indeed. And with Remainers, Sunak wins. With Leavers, Truss wins. And that might possibly be the crux of this whole issue. I mean, if you were Sunak, you'd be disappointed with those numbers, because he's only shading it with sort of 18 to 49-year-olds. He's getting beaten in every other age category. I think he's getting smashed in both male and female categories, or smashed in female, beaten in male. And this is the thing. When it comes to looking prime ministerial, he's only got a 1% lead. Yet his poll ratings as a potential PM have been ahead of Truss's. So you'd be a bit disappointed just because, yes, it's a 5-week campaign, and yes, I don't think it's totally over yet, but at the same time, ballots are out this time next week. The pair of them are having another debate as we speak. Then there's Sky, and that's next Thursday. And I believe that Andrew Neil is interviewing Rishi Sunak this Friday. We might have seen it by the time we're out or not. That's not an awful lot of time to reach all of that Conservative Party membership audience. And they would have wanted it to be a bit closer, and it was essentially at the end of the MPs voting.
Sure. And then what about, for anyone who's interested in other aspects of political betting, is there anything of interest, any kind of movement? I mean, I know that Keir Starmer was doing some speeches yesterday, etc. Has it become a lot more likely that he's going to become, 2 years down the line, the leader of this country?
I think it has become less likely because Boris Johnson isn't there, and that's the pure and simple of it. I think, however, this leadership election and these debates are helping him. They're taking pressure away from Labour's own positions on things such as rail nationalisation. As in total rail renationalisation, we know that it's a split hybrid at the moment. Water, energy and stuff, their support for the unions, all those tricky issues that Labour have found themselves sort of wedged in the middle on, have been overshadowed, I think, by the Conservative leadership race. And it's not looked good for the Tories. And yesterday, they were really taking lumps out of each other. So, no, this is good for them. And this is good for them. The only thing is they got to kick on at some point, start the whole policy regarding are we taking whatever back into public hands today has been a mess. And they're lucky. I think it hasn't got the attention that it might have received on a different day.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again. All the best.
Cheers.
Bye. Brilliant.